Okay, welcome everyone to New Yorkers for Safer Streets discussion with Councilmember Kallos to discuss post-COVID recovery and a path forward to a thriving NYC. My name is Nicole and I'm part of the New Yorkers for Safer Streets leadership team. I'm a mom of 2 kids, ages 6 and 7. I live on the Upper East Side, and like many of you, I've been apartment bound here in the city for several weeks. New Yorkers for Safer Streets was formed in October of 2019 out of local parents' growing concerns for a decline in safety and quality of life in the city. Our goal is to make sure parents' voices are heard and families' needs are represented. We regularly meet with elected officials to share insights and feedback from over 3,000 members of New Yorkers for Safer Streets and to press for meaningful and innovative changes to achieve a more livable city for families. Good evening, Councilmember Kallos. Welcome and thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me. I am a big fan of your organization. I remember when you weren't quite 1,000 people strong, and I really appreciate that you stopped by our first Friday. I wish other elected officials did a first Friday and that had open doors, and I really appreciate what you had to say. And I've been very impressed with what you've been able to do, the attention you've been able to garner in the media. I think the New York Post did some great coverage. And I know it's just the beginning of something great. So I'm a big fan of yours.
Thank you so much, and we're glad to be joined with you tonight. Tonight, we will discuss the impact that the pandemic has had on New York City families, share families' questions and concerns, and talk about what the future holds. We will pose as many of the questions we receive from parents as time permits. If we don't get to your question, please email us at leadership@saferstreetsny.org, and we will work with Councilmember Kallos to get your questions answered. The pandemic has turned a magnifying lens on many of New Yorkers for Safer Streets' original concerns, heightening awareness of the serious safety and public health issues we face. Looming budget cuts and dire financial forecasts have many wondering what the future looks like and how New York will fare in the coming months and years. Many of us are questioning, how will we return to the workplace? What will our kids do this summer? What will happen with school? Or whether we should stay in the city at all. Some have left, and many who love this city are finding themselves struggling with the trade-offs inherent in the decision to stay. At the same time, we are hopeful that while life will be different, it can get better. We hope to walk away from tonight with a better understanding of the vision for the future of New York City and renewed hope that it is a time to build a better city for our families and our children. Councilmember Kallos, before we get started, we have a ton of questions. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
I think everything you shared is absolutely what we're all struggling with. Sounds like some of you, it sounds like at least those who are hosting are lucky enough to have their kids who are already in bed or a little bit older than mine. I have a 2-year-old. We're in a very small 1-bedroom on the East Side. And I think what I would just say is I think I'm going through everything that a lot of your members are going through, trying to balancing parenting with the demands of a more than full-time job. And the only thing I will say is I am grateful that I've had more time with my daughter. I will say, and the other thing I'm grateful for, she is 2, and all she knows is she's getting more time with mom and dad. I can't imagine what a lot of you are dealing with who have older kids who are probably experiencing a lot more stress than my daughter is right now with potty training.
Thanks for sharing that. I definitely think we're all dealing with different struggles right now as parents in different age groups. Tonight, we have so many families from your district joining us, so let's dive right into their questions. I think we can all agree it's been tough being cooped up at home for several weeks. New Yorkers are typically on the go and out and about, and this has been quite different. So that leads us right to our first question from Ann. What is the biggest obstacle to some kind of return to normalcy in New York?
That's the biggest obstacle has been our administration and a lot of the other elected officials I deal with, from the President of the United States on down. When this all happened, people were saying, oh, it's not that bad. Oh, you shouldn't get testing. And if you look at my newsletters going back to day one, we've been saying, we need beds, we need ventilators, we need PPEs, and we need testing. And even when everyone else said we don't need testing, I said we're going to get testing done. So what we will need is what we're seeing in every other modern society on this planet that's gotten back to normal, which is we're going to need access to testing everywhere, anywhere, early and often. And we'll talk a lot about it a little bit more later, but we do have some ideas on where we can get testing, working with Cornell University in my district. We did get 550 beds in the district, 350 at Kohler, 200 at Hospital for Special Surgery, Hospital Special Surgery. If you need anything orthopedic, that is the place you want to be. And so they're back in operations. We still have the 350 beds at Kohler. The USNS Comfort is it has already went home. Javits is back down. And I think right now, I actually brought this to the administration over the past 2 days. So testing, a vaccine would be great, but testing in the interim, getting to a place where we can start taking people's temperatures as they're going in and out of different places like we're seeing in other jurisdictions. But it comes down to the testing, and I hope to have good news there. I think we are seeing that folks want to open. Today, I don't know, I imagine a lot of you, it was nice, warm weather this weekend. And so my family, Saturday, we went to Central Park, and one tip I will share with the 33 people in this group and anyone watching online is just, we've discovered that if you're out the door by 8 or 9 a.m., you can pretty much have a space in the park. But what we found is at 1 or 2 or right around then, that's when somehow a group of people comes in, a group of New Yorkers who are like, we don't care about anybody else. And they're not wearing masks. We had set up a space. There were other families. Everyone was about 12 feet away from each other. And then 1 or 2 o'clock rolled around and people just like got on top of us and it was time to pack up. We put our daughter in a covered piece. So I think getting people to actually observe social distancing. So I've actually reached out to the City Hall. I mentioned it in a hearing. You can watch it online tonight, where I said, because right now in low-income communities of color, police are actually throwing young people down on the streets, assaulting them, while on the Upper East Side, there's zero policing of social distancing. So what I've said is, can we activate our police auxiliary, which are people who aren't paid police officers, they're volunteers, to go around and issue warnings? Because we don't need to pay police officers to issue warnings because they can do so much more. One of my thoughts was, what if we went to Central Park and all the people who are jogging, and if you're one of the people jogging, I hope you're wearing a mask, but if you're not somebody I'm very happy with at the moment. And what if we just stamped everyone who is jogging without a mask with a W that said they were warned? And when they got around the thing and did their second lap and they were still not wearing the mask, they look at the hand and they say, okay, you're going to get a $1,000 ticket. So I think there's actually enforcing the social distancing, getting testing. They're going to be opening up parts of New York State, not New York City, on May 15th. We're going to hopefully get things up. I think the fact that they're keeping schools closed through the remainder of the year is an indicator that we can't get back to work, because if you go back to work and you've got a kid less than 12, then you have an Administration for Children's Services problem. So I'm very concerned about that. And in your opening, I figure we're probably going to get into what to do about childcare, which is personal for me too.
Definitely. Thanks for that. And I think our parents have shared a lot of concerns about what they've seen at the parks when they do try to take their children out and keep them safe. So I appreciate that there'll be more focus on that, the social distancing and lack of it at Central Park that we've seen.
Well, what I'll say is just, I'm not omniscient. I've passed the request on. I will be working with you as my eyes and ears, letting me know, taking photos, taking social media, tagging me, tagging the mayor. What do we need? Oh, we're running fast. So we will need you to be our eyes and ears in the streets so that we can do things. We also, one other key thing that I want people to know, we opened up East End from 83rd to 89th from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. So one of the challenges at Carlshurst Park is that there's really no place for the kids to play, and we shut down the playgrounds. And so I was out there on Monday when we opened it, and kids were there on their scooters, they were there on their skateboards and on their bikes, and there was finally a space where they could go, where it was mainly parents and other children, and people were respecting social distancing while I was there.
That's great. So clearly this is an unprecedented time and fiscal responsibility is required. Talk to us about your top priorities for the budget this year.
I've had very few big priorities. A lot of it has been reducing government waste and corruption. So I've been very disappointed that the city spent $600 or $700 giving every 300,000 kids iPads, and the iPads don't even have keyboards, and a laptop is so much less than an iPad. So I'd rather just buy an iPad for every single public school student and give them equity and give them free universal broadband than just hand a small segment of them iPads, which some of the kids just got iPads last Friday. And I know folks may want to talk about some of the things with the grading, but so my two top priorities are youth services and education, which I know the group of you who met with me know how important kids are to me, and senior services. And the reason is that those are the two places where if we invest, the payoff is usually exponential. So if we invest in our children and their education, then, and we make it so that folks, and one of the things you said in your opening is the worst part of my job. The worst part of my job is when somebody comes up to me and says, Ben, I voted for you. It's good to see you. I moved out of the city because I couldn't take it anymore. And I'll just say, I feel that pressure too. And I'm an elected official. And I think that's part of why you want your elected officials to live in the neighborhood and be in touch and feel the same pressures, because it is damn hard to afford to live here. And it's even harder when you're crammed in an itty bitty apartment during a pandemic. So youth services, we talked about it when we first met in terms of how do we deal with youth crime and child on child criminality that can occur, or even kids just being mean to each other. And so the thing that I'm a big believer in, and I have a psychology degree, Maslow's hierarchy. So I want to make sure that we get every single kid 3 meals a day. We're up to 2, and folks can actually go pick them up at our enrichment centers. I want to make sure that kids have access to unconditional love and mentorship, even if that may not be available in the home. And since a lot of us work, I'm still working now, late hours, that means having after school activities. So I introduced legislation on universal after school. I think that's just as important as it was before. Also legislation on universal summer camp, which the mayor's cutting. And then there's another program for older kids over 14 called Summer Youth Employment. And so the city has been paying 75,000 children to get job experience, enrichment, and stay out of the streets and stay out of trouble. And the city is about to say to 300,000 children, school's out, your parents have to go back to work, good luck, and stay out of trouble. And I'll tell you, I was a kid, and growing up in this city, if you're not being supervised by an adult, you're getting in trouble. So that's one piece. And then senior services, we all have seniors, we all have folks. I spend a lot of time at our senior centers. It can be isolating to be a senior in the city. It's a place that is attractive because it's so accessible. You can live in an elevator building, you don't have to drive, but things are very expensive. So our senior centers have congregate meal programs, they have exercise. And so for somebody who's home in the city, it allows them to have a life on their own, and it keeps them self and independent and keeps them out of a nursing home. So my position is that if we can provide senior services, they're a fraction of the price. Otherwise, they end up in a nursing home at $15,000 a month. And if we fail our children, they end up in the juvenile system, and I believe anywhere between $20,000 and $30,000 a month, but that's for the rest of their lives. In both cases, it's a life sentence.
Thanks for sharing that. And we'll have a couple more questions on some of those topics
I
as we
know.
move along. So they were definitely on the minds of our parents here tonight. Elsa asks, how do you think the city can recover the incredible budget loss we will face this year?
When I got elected, we had a $67 billion budget. We haven't seen population growth. We've just seen revenue growth. And at this point, we were looking at a $95 billion budget. I think we started with a $6 billion cut, but we're now looking at an $8 billion cut. Our city's contracts budget has been bloated from, I think, $14 billion up to $16 billion. Our capital budget has grown from $30 billion to $90 billion. So listen, before the pandemic, before my grocery prices went up by 50 to 200%, I had a budget. And actually earlier this week, my wife and I sat down, we did our pandemic budget, where we reassessed a lot of things we were spending on. I canceled my Metro card because why am I spending $150 a month on a Metro card that I can't use? So I think the city should be reevaluating the things we're spending money on and cutting the things we won't miss before we start cutting the things we will miss. And during today's budget hearing, what I said is, are we, when we're looking at cuts, doing a cost benefit analysis of like, I don't need to change my oil every 10,000 miles. I can save $20. But if I do that, then in about 30, 40,000 miles, I might need a new engine. And that'll cost me $44,000. So that's how I feel about their cuts to summer camp, summer youth employment, and senior services. That's just going to cost us more in the long run. So I'm actually hoping that folks on the call, because a lot of my ideas don't come from me, they come from folks like you, and it makes me look a lot smarter than I am, can help me identify places for savings, particularly at DOE, where there's a lot of consulting contracts. I think there's $4 billion in consulting contracts, or we spent $1/3 billion on iPads. I know for a fact that I've already spent about $5 million buying laptops for every school in my district. And the school's teachers actually told me that the principals, a handful of principals said, we actually gave out your laptops, but school parents and families actually said no to them because they wanted the iPads instead. So I think it's just looking for cost savings and looking for waste. And I think there's so much waste in this bloated budget that we could do it without even noticing it.
Thank
but
you.
It'll be hard.
Yes. The next question is actually about public education. So we know the mayor is recommending more than $800 million in cuts to public education. Can you talk to us a little bit about the implications of these budget cuts? And if the budget is cut, will we have what we need to safely open schools when the time comes?
That is a very good question. And it is something that we talked about today. We had a budget hearing. You can watch it online at council.nyc.gov. The answer is that none of it makes sense and everything is contradictory. So Cuomo just yesterday was saying, if and when we open schools, we're going to have to do things differently. We might want to look at doing telecommute more. But the idea is, I've been building more schools in my district. We have thousands of more seats than we ever had before. We're on track to build another 1,000 or so, I think 860 something seats. But we're now looking in a world where we have a classroom, let's just say it's 20 by 30. And so that's like 600 square feet. But if each person needs a 6-foot radius around them, then that is a 12 by 12, so it's 144. So you can fit about, please don't embarrass me on the math, but you can probably fit about 5 to 6, maybe 10 if you push it, kids per class while safely social distancing. So they're saying we need to have fewer kids per class, which would be a great thing, but we're not going to build more facilities and we're going to have fewer teachers. So in the reality, what we're looking at is coming back in September with overcrowded classrooms with fewer teachers. And so this is where an organization like yours can weigh in, can activate, and say, don't cut our education system. And in some places it was already failing, and the places that it wasn't failing, just please leave us alone.
Great, that's really helpful. We received a lot of questions concerning even returning school to the fall and what this will look like. So we appreciate that. And we've all thought about how we'll be social distance when many of our children are in classrooms with 28 kids or 22 kids. So we
We're
know
looking at 36 kids.
yeah, yeah. So I think it's going to be very challenging when the schools don't have a lot of space. Carmen asked, what are the plans for schools next year? So I guess she's curious if there is a plan at this point or any updates that we haven't heard.
We had a town hall with Commissioner Barbeau about last month, and the feeling was that we weren't going to get back to school this school year in June, but their hope is to get kids back in school by September. So that is the hope. They have not put forward a plan. Governor Cuomo has said the same thing, that he wants kids back in school in September, but no one has any plan. I think one of the things I'm concerned about is that government tends to operate in a waterfall method of like, we're going to start on September 1st no matter what. And I'm a software developer and tech person, so I go with something called Agile. And in Agile, you plan for failure, and there's a word called graceful degradation. Which means it's going to fail, and when it fails, this is how it's going to fail so that everything doesn't break. So one of the things I've been encouraging the city to do is, like, instead of trying to buy 700,000 more laptops or iPads, let's just use the time between now and September to buy good laptops with keyboards for everyone. And instead of paying for LTE for everyone, which honestly isn't fast enough, we can reach out to Spectrum, Charter, and other organizations and see if we can get a contract with them for broadband in the home. So I guess I would like to make sure that we are plan for the worst, hope for the best.
Thanks.
And that's what I would urge everyone on this call to do. But that being said, I think the plan is from the mayor and the governor to go back to school in September and for everything to be fine.
Okay, great. Many parents are struggling to teach their kids and keep up with their jobs. So how will we prepare New York City students, families, to implement distance learning in the future, should it be necessary?
I think I've already dug in on that. I think giving everyone the laptops would be very helpful. I've heard from a lot of parents that it's important that if their student is at home with a computer and they're trying to get work done, that the kids have to be busy too. So that does mean finding a rubric in a way that doesn't broaden the digital divide and doesn't make the homework gap worse, to have grades. A number of parents have reached out to say, like, I spend my time trying to get my kids to study, and now that there's no grades, what's the point? So we have to find a way of keeping our kids motivated without harming kids who are trying to keep up with on an iPad. Like, I can't type on an iPad that well. Like, I could if you forced me, but I couldn't type my term paper on it. So I think there's a big piece for that. I'm going to be honest here. I'm always honest. That's one of what I wanted to warn people. What you're going to hear on this call may not make you happy. But I believe in radical honesty, because I believe that if I am completely honest with you about what I do and don't know, that you can work with me to come up with better solutions. And if I lie to you and say, no, everything's going to be all right, we're going to open in September, no worries, then that puts me in a disadvantage. It puts you at a disadvantage, and it means we can't solve this together. So my wife and I are struggling trying to teach our daughter, make sure she's keeping up with where she should be. I'm actually interested. I know this format doesn't quite work for it because we're doing a webinar, but I do First Friday every month, First Friday, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. That's where we first met. And I welcome folks to come and share some of their ideas. And we're actually working to organize a pandemic parenting town hall next month. And we're thinking of having a child psychologist there, somebody from a parenting organization, and somebody from the city. But if anyone has any ideas, you can email me at bkallos@benkallos.com about what you would like to hear from this event. And my wife actually overheard me that I was planning this, and she said, I don't go to your events usually, but this one I will go to. Honestly, your guess is as good as mine. I think it's about trying to work and support families and support children and keep the kids occupied. And the other piece would be, historically, the education many of you received and that I received is you did your lecture during the day and then you did homework at night. And I think that something Khan Academy trailblazed and would work better is if we flipped the school day so that during the evenings or after 3 o'clock, kids can watch the lecture and they can fast forward and stop it and play it and what have you to learn social studies or math. And then during the day between 8 a.m. and 3 p.m., that's when they start doing the assignments and the work and the quizzes and the tests, when they can actually have somebody who isn't a parent trying to do work or trying to recover from a long day. And let's be honest, ever since the pandemic, every day is a long day. But the teachers could help the students work through the problems.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And having younger children, a kindergartner and a second grader, I think the complaints I hear from their classes is I'm working all day and my child can't work independently, even with the iPad they have or they've been given. So I think there's going to be two different issues depending on the independence level of the child and the age group they're in. My kids, the younger kids aren't as concerned with grades, but they constantly need their parent to help and their parent's on a call and they can't get business done. So I think there's a real concern from families. How do I go back to my office? One, I can't leave my young children at home, but number two, even if I can stay at home and work, I have to work, not be their teacher. And so I think that's going to be a real question and concern of if we do have to do distance learning again in the future, is that being considered, how we're going to make sure that distance learning is learning by the teachers, not by the teaching by the parents.
Agreed. And then just a broader question. Some of you are employers, some of you are employees, but we've kind of designed a society, and I've spent my entire 6 years around fighting for 3K and pre-K. How can I create government services so that parents can be in the workforce and kids get the care they need? But our entire model has been around people having a career and parenting separately. Can we create a society as we come back to this that values parenting and says, you know what, this is the new normal, and that maybe employees are only going to work 30 hours a week instead of 80 or 100, and that folks are going to have children in the background or that what have you. And I'll be very honest, my staff and I have been working remotely, but I'll say everyone on my team is probably working harder now than they did before. So I would just love to talk to a bunch of CEOs at some of the biggest companies and smallest companies of like, how can we reinvent our economic way of life around acknowledging that people have children and their careers shouldn't be sacrificed or hurt because they are parents.
I think a lot of families would be applauding if they could right now. So we're glad to hear that people are thinking that way. I just want to touch back on the summer youth employment program that you mentioned earlier, because this came up from quite a few families mentioning this program is a lifeline for our city's youth and families that rely on this income. You said it's definitely being cut. I've seen in the news that a lot of city council members, and there's petitions out there to save the program. Are there any updates on the ability to save this program that's so important for these youth?
I think your organization mobilizing, collecting petition signatures, the important part is the email. Having those folks email their local council members, having them email the mayor directly. Those are the ways to continue to push for it. The mayor did make an announcement, I believe, sometime today saying that he wasn't going to necessarily do it out of his budget, but he was looking for foundation dollars to do so. I think that it's your tax dollars. So if you want it, we should do it. And we should use your money for it. But at the end of the day, I tend to be a little bit pragmatic. So if any of you know any foundation people who want to pay for it, we will take that money, but we should use our tax dollars if we can't do it that way.
Okay, great, thanks. Let's shift over to, we have quite a few questions on public safety. We know early on police presence was down in the 19th precinct due to COVID-19 and officers who were out with that, but it is back up to normal levels now, which is great. How will budget impact staffing and presence in your district's precincts?
We have, so we have one of the largest precincts by population. The 19th precinct patrols a lot more than most other comparable precincts, and they do an amazing job. I'm a big fan of Commanding Officer Walsh. I think she does a great job. The mayor has not proposed any cuts to NYPD. Today, during the budget hearing, because of the policing that we are seeing of social distancing in communities of color, the NYPD was under attack for that. And they said, why not pull $40 million out of NYPD and put it into SYEP? Because that would be diversion. It would stop those interactions. So I think right now there are no real budget cuts planned for NYPD. The city council has proposed not graduating the next 2 police academy classes in order to save money and keep them as cadets. But what I would say for now is we're not looking at any cuts to the NYPD, and we can work together. The NYPD reports directly to the mayor, just like the chancellor of the schools. So I'm happy to help amplify. When the 19th precinct gets back to business and we reopen, they will have a precinct council. It's usually the first Monday of the month on 67th Street at 7 p.m. And that's where folks can come out and say, we're really grateful that you did X, Y, Z. Do you mind doing more, or could you do it here at this time? I've found that when somebody walks up to me and said, you didn't do anything, that puts me in a certain mood and puts me predisposed to respond in a certain way. But if somebody comes over and says, Ben, you did such a great job getting there to be enforcement of bikes on 79th in York, do you think you could also do it on 79th and 1st on Mondays at 4 p.m.? And I'm like, wow, sure, why not? So I think whether it's bike enforcement, which I don't think is your issue, I think one of the things we had talked about, which isn't quite the issue anymore because of the pandemic, is that around 86th Street, we had started to see situations where, and I think multiple different parents had come to me, where groups of older children were taking phones and other belongings from groups of younger children. And so that was something we had been engaging before the pandemic. And one of the things I'll share with you is we have set about, I think, $250,000 aside for cameras in the neighborhood. Personally, I prefer not to have cameras everywhere, but they would go up. It would say it would be a feedback to the police department. And that's still moving forward, and it should be in by this year or next year, but hopefully as soon as possible. The other thing that I've been talking to folks about, and it might be worth starting to do some of the planning now, is I did approach some of the private schools. There are a bunch on Fifth Avenue, Madison Avenue, all over, and saying, hey, would you all be willing to chip in 5,000, 10,000, what have you, to Carnegie Hill neighbors? They have a security car that you may often see, and maybe we could get them to do a patrol, or all of you have security agents, maybe your agents can do a control. So again, radical honesty. Should government do their job? Should we have a beat cop between the schools and the subway, making sure the kids can get there safely? Absolutely. Has it happened yet? No. And so that's where I just try to work with folks to bring external resources to get it done.
Great, thank you so much. And the last question on this issue, because you answered a few of them that we had in that initial answer, is from Christian. He asked, what does it take for the city leadership to make laws that are in the interest of the majority of New York City citizens, that protect the law-abiding citizens, especially the most vulnerable, the children?
I'm not going to lie. It's hard. It is really hard. I put forward legislation that says, like, if there's something wrong with your building, you should fix it, and you should get the scaffolding down in 180 days. We've been working on it for 6 years. We have another bill that like students have PS 290. I don't know if you have any PS 290 parents, but the kids there are amazing to kindergarten. They introduced legislation. They're about to graduate PS 290, which said, how about we don't spray carcinogens on the grass in the parks where children play? Let's not spray Roundup in playgrounds. And that seems pretty straightforward. The evidence is out there. World Health Organization says it's a carcinogen. Monsanto has lost billions over this. And we can't get the city to agree to not spray poison in our parks. So honestly, what it takes to see change is groups of people like yourselves, starting with a group of 3 or 4 moms coming to a First Friday, growing to 1,000, doing webinars with 33 parents on a Wednesday night when they could be doing anything else in the world, and mobilizing, building, sending emails when we can congregating, doing virtual press conferences, and calling on people to do the right thing, writing to the editor, and just changing public opinion. And then ultimately, I've found a lot of success when we're able to legislate around a problem, around a specific person who has a specific story that we can help them with. I've done so many different bills. I'm just trying to figure out exactly like one of them where we literally legislated around helping an individual person, but it's been so many. So I think it's that. It's just telling a story and building that public support, but you're doing it. I remember when we first met and I said, it's going to be an uphill battle. Folks aren't always sympathetic. And so you guys have been an exception. You've gotten very favorable coverage in the New York Post, and it's part of just telling that story in the media and building that base. And please know that I'm with you 100%. And I'll just be honest about what we're up against.
Great, thank you. The pandemic has put a spotlight on the homeless crisis, despite spending billions of dollars by the administration to address this issue over the last several years. Patrick asked, long before COVID-19, I was hearing about homeless people being unwilling to accept offers of shelter and services from outreach workers because the shelters are too dangerous. What makes them so dangerous, and what should the city be doing about it?
I promise that that I am not Patrick, and that Patrick did not give me that question as a softball. There's a lot of pieces. So let me work in reverse order. So let's talk about shelters being dangerous. As contracts chair, I held a hearing about the Acacia Shelter Network, where people have died, and where the Wall Street Journal and I worked together to uncover that the person who ran the shelter also ran the security company, and he had a contract with himself, and the biggest budget item was security. And so there were a lot of conflicts of interest. And so one of the things I started pushing the administration to do is start to shut down shelter operators that weren't running safe shelters. And originally they were saying, well, you can't do it because then you're just going to kick people off on the street. And I said, no, I'm a lawyer. And in law, you have a concept of setting up a trusteeship where you can just step into somebody else's shoes and take over. I'm not going to say that the city's any better at running shelters than some of the nonprofits, but very few people want to go into the business. There aren't very many great operators, and there's a lot of politics involved that shouldn't be, and we should be looking at, I've been fighting for this for 6 years. It's called performance budgeting. It's how everyone runs a business. When you ask somebody to give you money, you say, if you give me $100,000, I can use $50,000 for marketing, $50,000 for new tech and staff, and I'll get you paid back in a year, and I'll get another $100,000 in income or what have you. And the city doesn't budget like that. So we're not being responsible about our vendors. And so there are a handful of very bad vendors out there who run very bad shelters. When a person who is homeless gets into the shelter system, they are randomly assigned to those shelters. Some legislation that I've been working on now for 6.5 years would be creating tracking around that. The city's been pushing back against it, and we've been trying to have conversations, but just trying to do outcome tracking around it. So a portion of the shelter system is broken. The next piece is that the myth of service resistance. Beggars can't be choosers is a saying, but the truth is everyone on this call knows that people will say no to bona fide offers of assistance because they are not offered on the terms that they want. And so some folks don't want to go to this shelter, but they'll go to that shelter. And the whole concept of service resistance is framed around the idea, it's the wrong idea, it's a question in faith, I guess. Are there people who might be trying to scam the system, and should we have a difficult bureaucracy to screen those people out? I'm a person of faith, I'm Jewish. One of the questions we ask is, or I ask, if you have a tzedakah box, a donation box in the synagogue, and it is there for people who are needy, is it a crime, is it a sin to go and take from there if you needed to buy a loaf of bread? I think everyone I've asked has said, yes, it's a crime. And I guess for me, it's a question of like, well, but it was there for somebody and so on and so forth. So the question comes down to, if somebody needs it, should we give them the assistance? So we have hotels, and some folks are like, I want to stay in a hotel, I don't want to go in a shelter. But how many of those are tourists who just want to shelter a hotel room for the night for free, or things like that? So there are people, I've run into them trying to assist people. I've helped people off the street. I've done more than I probably should have. And I've run into them later and they've said, well, thank you for the $20, but that was your fault for giving it to me. But good news, I'm set on a good path in life. So I guess what I would say is, first, we have bad providers. Second, we have this myth of service resistance when we really see a bureaucracy trying to avoid giving resources to people who may not need them. And then last but not least, on the Upper East Side, if you know of somebody who is homeless, I founded the Eastside Task Force for Homeless Outreach and Services because I didn't see any help coming from anywhere else. And so once every couple of months, it hasn't convened since the pandemic, we get all the churches, synagogues, service providers, soup kitchens, nonprofits in the neighborhood to a table. It's a coalition of the willing. The price to sit at my table is you have to be willing to build supportive housing for homeless people in the neighborhood. And what that means is, if you let me, and I hope you would, I would like to take all the homeless people in the neighborhood, build a building next to wherever you live and wherever I live, and fill it with 20, 30, 50 units where people can be in their own apartments that you pay for with your tax dollars, but they will have social workers, security, doctors, and everything they need on site, because we have a choice. They can either be on our streets, in supportive housing, or in affordable housing. But that's that. So we have built supportive housing. We built it across the street from where I live. We built it in the same school district, school zone as my daughter and I. So my daughter will be going to school with children who were formerly homeless. And we meet and we talk about the different people in the neighborhood who are homeless. And we ask people like, do you know their name? And we ask, what would it take to get this person off the street? And sometimes it's, could we scrape together a bus ticket because they have a long lost cousin or sibling in Texas, and that person in Texas will welcome them in now that they're sober. Or this person wants to get sober, but they need to get into this sobriety program because they don't like the others. There's any number of things. This person needs a storage unit. This person needs a shelter that will accept their dog. This is a couple, but they're not married. So these are all real life experiences, and we've been able to identify them by name, use your tax dollars to give them the resources they need. And that's why if you walk around the Upper East Side, it doesn't look like Midtown, it doesn't look like Penn Station, it doesn't look like the rest of the city. And that's because if you're in my district, we're gonna help you.
Great, thank you for sharing that. I think that covers most of that. So we'll move on. Let's talk about recovery. So as we prepare ourselves for the eventual return to the workplace, which we talked about earlier, is a struggle for many parents, and decisions will have to be made, and hopefully companies will come to the table and be more understanding. Many parents asked about city resources, that kids need and parents rely on. Yasmina asks, how can we push de Blasio to open pools this summer, a crucial resource for kids? Sushma asked, how and when can we reopen playgrounds? And also many parents asked about summer camps. Can you shed any light on what will happen this summer with those three?
The mayor has cut funding to all three in the budget. So we will need to push very hard to get all of them. In terms of for small business assistance, which was a piece of that, we're doing a town hall with Congressmember Carol Maloney, who's fighting for federal dollars for us and winning in Congress, and Commissioner Greg Bishop on Tuesday, May 12th from 6 to 7. You can learn more at benkallos.com/events. In terms of the pools, we have John Jay Pool in the district. I don't know enough about coronavirus, and if somebody don't mind, if that person who had the question about the pools can email me, I will forward a question to DOHMH about whether or not water is a vector for transmission. Because I know it's airborne, I don't know if it's waterborne. I just don't know enough. If there's a way to social distance, I'm open to it. I will say that John Jay already has long lines, so we would have to try to figure out some sort of, I'm open to any ideas, and whether it's having a lottery system so that every family gets to come in for a little bit every single day and we can social distance. Otherwise, it's just, that lines are already long. That's going to be around the park, but like something we can look at as well as beaches. But I think I want to make sure that we're paying attention to the administration, to other states, and making sure that we're all doing it at the same time. I would hate for New York City to be the only place that opens their beaches and then everyone just piles on and gives it. Honestly, for all of you on the call, I've been sharing this with my wife, but after Saturday and Sunday, I would just say, wait till May 15th. On May 15th, look at the milestone tracker, a Department of Health and Human and Mental Hygiene. And if we're continuing to plateau and go down, then it means we probably have enough antibodies. Doesn't matter how many jerks don't wear masks, and that we might be through this. But if we see an uptake, we're always 2 weeks behind this disease. So if we see a spike on May 15th, then we're going to be in for a very long ride, and September is not going to be great. So that's one piece. And then in terms of the summer camp, we need to get that funding, petition, get people together, talk to the press, and make sure that we are having a representative coalition of the entire borough of Manhattan, just not the Upper East and Upper West Side.
Thanks. I want to shift to small businesses. We received so many questions about this, and we know so many families that own small businesses, children's businesses.
Yeah.
They make our streets safer, and they really contribute to the vibrance and what we love in New York City, and they support our schools. Many aren't able to receive funding or fear they won't be able to come back from this. We received a lot of questions about your vision for the small business crisis the city is facing. Is there any plan to scrap commercial rent tax, property tax reform, rent relief? And how do you plan to help support the local businesses that make our neighborhood so special?
So we have the town hall. Let me just plug it one more time. It's going to be May 12th at 6 p.m. RSVP at benkallos.com. You can also call 212-860-1950. I've been thinking a lot about this, and I love my wife because she pushes back with me a lot. So when Trump lowered the interest rates to 0% for the banks, I kind of went off, and I was like, why do they always have to bail out the banks? What about you and me? What about people running small businesses? What about families? And I was like, you know what, landlords, we need to have a bailout for landlords so we don't have to pay the rent. And my wife's like, why are you always so hostile to landlords? So no, somebody in my family is pushing back against me being so anti-real estate. So I thought about it, and what I came up with is making sure that everyone who got something from the federal government had to do something. And it sounded a little crazy, so I called an economist. Her name's Teresa Garaducci at the New School, and she said everything you said is actually right. So what I proposed, and we put out as an opinion editorial in Cranes, you can read it at benkallos.com. Cranes is paywalled unless your subscriber is. It's 5 things. 1, if you're a bank and you take money at 0% from the federal government, then you have to offer forgiveness for anyone who can't cover their mortgage. So if you're and that's fine. So then if you're a landlord and you take that mortgage assistance, then you can't charge rent to your tenants. And if you're one of those tenants and you don't take, and you take that rental assistance, then you can't fire your employees. Or if you do fire your employees, it has to be on a furlough where you bring them back afterwards. But that's what I put out. And it was the 4 or 5 things that we could do. And just making sure that Reagan and Reaganomics has this like trickle down effect, but it doesn't work. You give the money to the banks and it's not like all of a sudden everyone's like, oh, I have money. This actually would require everyone at every step of the way who's getting a benefit to pass it down. So that's one idea. That being said, I'm open to new ideas. I'm seeing a chat that just says next.
We've received a lot of questions about this pandemic forcing us all to realize that, you know, we want a different future. We want a better city after this. And curious what the conversations have been among City Council about creating a more walkable, greener, and family-friendly city.
Yes to walkable. I think as we look at our streets and we're closing down, we closed 7 miles, starting with my district. I fought so hard for that, you wouldn't believe. That's supposed to go out to 100. Bloomberg started with his pedestrian plazas in Times Square, as well as Madison Square Park. If you have places that you think we can change things, I'm open to it. We have a tremendous car culture. And if you think about it, we all live in apartment buildings and whether it's 6 stories or 20 stories. And so you might be living anywhere with 20 to, in my building, 2,000 neighbors. And on my block, I'm going to guess there's 40 parking spots, maybe. And so in exchange for 40 people have a place to park, 2,000 people don't. But if you try to take those parking spots away from those 40 people, they will come with pitchforks. What I have said at East 72nd Street Neighborhood Association, I'll say to your organization, is it can come from the grassroots so it doesn't feel like it's coming down from me. And we can talk about ways to redesign our parking spots. In San Francisco and in other countries, when a business wants a sidewalk cafe, they don't use the sidewalk. And if you have a stroller and you're trying to get past those sidewalk cafes, when we used to have them, it was impossible. But they get to set up their sidewalk cafe in parking spots. So one thing that came up at First Friday was a small business owner saying, well, if I'm not going to be able to put as many people in my restaurant, at least for the summer, can I have the parking and can I close down a lane of traffic so I can just spread out on the entire street and have social distancing with the same number of tables? And I said, that is an amazing idea. Let's do it. Let's work with you. Let's build it from the ground up. So if you and your organization were willing to push it, because the people with cars will come for me and they will come hard, I would love to support you on rethinking our streetscape and parking and using it for outdoors and closing down different streets that may not have parking garages. We do it with the schools for play streets. 91st Street, where I live, is a play street. So I'm open to anywhere you folks want to do it. And I think it's just a matter of building the support and telling the car owners that we love them, but we need that space for the rest of us.
Thanks for that. And we'll definitely be in touch on our ideas for that. I know our members have many, many ideas and thoughts.
And sorry, I think one thing in addition to the radical honesty, which I warned about before, is, and I think you know this, but whether it's PS 290 kindergarten students or it's Eastside Middle School students who actually wrote a law about gender sexuality alliances, I believe government is a partnership, and I have this job for another year and 7 months. But while I have it, I'm going to lend it to you. And everything I do, I believe, is a partnership. and I know you may feel like, well, I pay you, you should just get it done for me. And I wish it worked that way. And I wish I had a magic wand. I do have certain magic wands. I do have a Harry Potter replica. But that being said, I think we can get more done together than any one of us can get done on our own.
Thank you for that. Councilmember Kallos, thank you so much for your leadership and time this evening. We hope that everyone here tonight found this evening informative, and we will update you on future forums that we're planning to host on this topic. Later this month, we're excited to announce we are going to have candidate forums to give parents a chance to hear from the candidates who will be on the primary election ballots on June 23rd. We're really excited to get parents, give parents the opportunity to pose questions to candidates, learn who's going to be on the ballot, and make informed voting decisions, especially on issues that are important to us as families. We will post these meetings on our website at saferstreetsny.org. On Twitter, our handle is at saferstreetsny, and we'll post them on our Instagram. Please sign up to receive our newsletter or follow us on social media to stay informed of our events and our efforts. And thank you to everyone for joining us this evening. I know everyone's very busy. Be safe and have a great night.